Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Great Shot Kid, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that looks at the technical and inspirational side of Star Wars creators and the creative process. I'm John.
And I'm Mike.
And this week, we finally get to a special treat where, because everybody's been talking about the Han Solo movie and the shakeup with directors there, a comparison to give us an idea. So this week, we are looking at 21 Jump Street by Miller and Lord, and we are looking at The Paper by Ron Howard, a movie from the 1990s. So we're looking at this from the perspective of these are both relatively fast-moving scripts and films, and what about the styles do we see with these directors? And I was trying to look at, I had never seen 21 Jump Street before. You had, Mike. I
Yes.
had seen The Paper before, but you had not, correct?
That's right. So we kind of flip-flopped on those.
So I'll let you go first, Mike. Give everybody a breakdown. What is The Paper about?
The Paper, it's about, it's like a day in the life of a newspaper, essentially, right? And it takes place over the span of 24 hours, and it's about Michael Keaton, who runs like the Metro section of the newspaper, and there's a thing that happens where these white businessmen are killed, and there are racial slurs written on their car, and there are a couple of black teenagers who happen to be walking by when it happens, and they are essentially framed for this murder by the police, as a way of just sort of like finding someone to take the blame, you know, and showing that, you know, they're taking action in a timely manner and all that stuff. And this seems to be the story, but Michael Keaton thinks that maybe the story is that these kids are actually innocent, and he's chasing that lead, maybe at the expense of his career and family.
Yes. It's about being a principled person in the midst of the turmoil of trying to get a deadline done. Mm-hmm. What's more important, the deadline or being right? And that is sort of the theme going through the whole film. And 21 Jump Street is a zany comedy that's somewhat self-aware, where instead of just updating the beloved 1980s TV show that launched Johnny Depp's career, instead is just really sort of like a madcap opportunity for Channing Tatum and Jonah Hill to do a buddy comedy with a lot of really bawdy humor. I mean, I think that pretty much encapsulates 21 Jump Street. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, they're undercover cops, and their boss is Ice Cube.
Yes.
And the focus of 21 Jump Street is to make you laugh, not to tell you a story about, being a principled newspaper man in a bygone era.
No.
So,
well, I was just going to say, but I do think that there are some interesting things going on thematically in that movie, in terms of, you know, being yourself and sort of like embracing your weirdness, and working together with others in order to achieve goals and all that good stuff. I think more than anything, it is kind of a high school movie, and it's just that the people who are sort of like experiencing high school are a couple of 25-year-old cops, but they're still learning the high school lessons in a sense, you know?
Well, high school has changed since they were there. I mean, that I think is probably the thing that was very much missing from the original 21 Jump Street. Is, you know, the whole concept is these cops look young enough to be in school, so they're going to infiltrate. I mean, it's like a Mod Squad thing, basically. Yeah. Whereas this is much more, has a lot more fun, because people, you know, keep saying to Channing Tatum, you know, what are you, like 30? You know, you don't look like you belong in high school.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's definitely a part of the bit. I had not seen the paper in many years. I actually worked at a very small newspaper and saw a press screening back when it was released, and I remembered really liking it a whole lot. We never, ever had deadlines like that. We were a podunk little newspaper for, a county in Maryland. And it was, so we didn't face any sort of, oh my gosh, we're going to get the big paper splash page and that sort of thing. But it was endearing. This time around, what was interesting about it was I really realized two things. The first was how much the world has changed since that movie came out. Because as they're talking about these deadlines and everything, one of the things is, Glenn Close tries to hold the line saying, you can be right tomorrow. We got to get the story out there today. And how much that thinking very much exists in the internet age. People don't care about being right. They care about getting the scoop. And there's also a rant that Robert Duvall, who plays the head honcho at the paper, basically, he has a rant about columnists, saying it's just a bunch of people giving their opinion. What do I care? I want to hear about the news. And it's like, well, wow, it's a good thing that this guy was, the internet was a hard time for this guy to be alive.
Yeah.
It
is interesting. I mean, technology has changed so much. I mean, the fact that this is in a pre-internet, world, and I mean, yeah, you had TV stations and everything, but now it's different in that all of these newspapers have websites, and essentially you're going to get all of the news before the newspaper is out. I
mean, this movie exists even before the cell phone revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So people are able, people don't know where somebody is for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I think it's fascinating. I think also what's really fascinating is the fact that Randy Quaid plays a columnist who basically has made somebody's life a living hell. And it comes back at the end with with a very, vitriolic, angry moment where the guy talks about how, you've destroyed my life. And Randy Quaid says, well, it was just your turn.
Mm-hmm.
You work for the city. It's just your turn. And even that, looking at that in terms of the internet is, I mean, people make jokes now about how the fact that, every day somebody's outraged about something online. And it's like, who are we torching today?
Yeah.
And it's, it really is very interesting to see how things have changed, but how they've sort of stayed the same. It's just become more hectic.
Mm-hmm.
You used to have to wait 24 hours to find out who the target of your wrath was, and now you can find out every 24 minutes. But outside of that, technically speaking, what did you think of the paper in terms of what it might say about Ron Howard's approach to, I mean, Han Solo movie is obviously, I mean, it's pretty ensemble cast. I mean, it's a Han Solo movie, but you've got Lando and you've got Woody Harrelson playing a character, so you know that it's not a minor character, and you've got these other people in there who are going to be in the mix. What do you think about how the paper is put together that says about how Ron Howard's approach to a multi-storyline, multi-character type of cast?
Well, it has a very large ensemble too, and some pretty big names like Michael Keaton and Marissa Tomei, Spider-Man, hey, and you've got Glenn Close and Randy Quaid and Robert Duvall and all these other people, and they all have like their moments and stuff. I mean, some of them have some pretty thorough storylines, like Robert Duvall and stuff like that, and I think that he does a pretty good job of like handling all those threads and keeping them manageable, especially in a reasonable running time and everything like that. I think tonally it's kind of weird at times. I know you were saying like, oh, it's like a comedy. Like, I definitely don't think it's a comedy. I mean, there's some lighthearted moments or some humor in it, but I guess, I definitely wouldn't consider it to be a comedy, even though that's kind of like even how it's billed online and everything, but I think that it is pretty solid for the most part. I think the ending is very, very bizarre, but yeah, for the most part, I think it's really good, and it is kind of interesting to see how these things work, like it's almost like a procedural in a sense in terms of like how a newspaper works, and that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, I get what you're saying with that. I think to address the comedy thing, I think that it's a comedy because at the time period, despite Batman, Michael Keaton was still primarily known as a comic actor. And he definitely brings the comic energy to it. And there are definite humorous moments to the film. So it's undoubtedly one of those marketing choices where they thought they were going to get better traction by saying, hey, look, it's a Michael Keaton comedy. Mm-hmm. Return to form for, Batman sort of thing. With the procedural, I would always be fascinated because, newspapers aren't quite gone yet. But I would be so fascinated to get people's reactions who are maybe a little bit younger, who have, never read the news. Like for us, we still have that touchstone. We're still familiar with newspaper culture outside of the time of the internet. And so seeing this, we can still sort of plug in. I would love to see whether there's, that mind-blowing moment of like, wow, how did you guys get news back in the, in the old days or something like that. In terms of juggling the plot lines, what struck me was with all of the multiple stuff, it still feels very planned. It doesn't feel very spontaneous. Even during the scene, like there are a couple of scenes when Randy Quaid shoots the stack of newspapers, very well handled, but it's got a very stage play feel to it, where it has a rhythm. This person talks and this person talks, and there's talking over other people, but you're never confused about what's going on. The focus is always on the person you need to focus, which, I mean, maybe that is something that they very much wanted Howard to bring to the Han Solo movie. Is there are obviously a lot of characters, and there's probably a lot of kinetic movement and scenes, but Kasdan definitely seems to be from that more rhythmic school of ensemble casts.
Yeah, even though, Howard has done comedies in the past, I think his comedies like this one are sort of more grounded in reality, and they tend to be more formal in nature than, improvisational. At least that's how it seems to me anyway.
Yeah, very, and all the indications are that that's specifically what Kasdan wanted back.
Yeah.
Was less improv. And so I think that's probably a good segue into 21 Jump Street.
Yeah.
Because that definitely has a very different energy about it.
Yes, it does.
It's very much looser than the paper is. So, like throwing them head to head, I mean, what do you see different about 21 Jump Street? I mean, besides the improv feel to it, what is it about that energy? Do you think that there's something lost from moving away from what obviously would have been that model toward a more Ron Howard model?
Yeah, I think there is definitely something lost, because I think with Ron Howard, and I think this is one of the reasons why they hired him, it's like, exactly what you're going to get, Mm-hmm. And with Miller and Lord and 21 Jump Street, I mean, one of the things which is really striking to me about 21 Jump Street is that while there is a lot of improvisation and everything, there is still like a lot of cool stuff going on formally. Like it does have like a definitive structure. The action beats, I think, are still really well choreographed and really well done. And it's like they're playing within a certain set of parameters instead of, just going crazy and like making things up on the fly, completely. It's kind of like Ghostbusters in that sense, And
that's a good point.
It's interesting that people, they weren't saying that it was like, some of these insiders and stuff, they weren't saying that it was like super funny necessarily. It was just improvised, not necessarily improvisational comedy, just improvisation, and I don't know. To me, like, if that's how they work, if that's how they find these things, then, more power to them. I don't know. I would be more excited about seeing a Star Wars movie in the style of 21 Jump Street than I would be in seeing a Star Wars movie in the style of The Paper, because I don't think that a Star Wars movie in the style of The Paper is much different from what we already get,
Sure.
Whereas I think that, while there is the potential for failure by doing a Star Wars movie like 21 Jump Street, I think that the potential for success is also much higher, or potential for something great is much higher.
I completely agree with you, and I think that this speaks to, the whole quandary that, Disney wants to make its money back, and Disney wants to set up a franchise that can pay for itself, and so going from that, people say, oh, well, that's why they want to have a strong hand at the wheel, but at the same time, the only way you're going to expand the appeal, you have to freshen it up. You have to make it accessible to younger audiences that want something more in that style. And I think also somebody else pointed this out on Twitter, and movies are rewritten all the time. There's always a writer on set that's, coming up with new pages or something like that. And somebody pointed out on Twitter, rather snarkily, but I thought it was a decent point, where during this whole thing, the word is leaked out that Kasdan wanted people who were sticking more to the script, and they pointed out that in Empire Strikes Back, one of the beloved moments was improvised on set while they were filming.
Yeah.
So it becomes one of those things of, I think to speak to your point, like, have they just lost all sense of, are they just completely risk averse? 21 Jump Street, I will tell you that I was delightedly surprised because I'd say the first third of it was getting like big guffaw laughs out of me. I was legitimately just cracking up watching it, and even to the point of Ice Cube, the way he does his role in that is so brilliant.
He's really good. Yeah,
he really is. And I thought, for me, Channing Tatum was, in a sense, a revelation. I was like, wow. I've never been one to like rag on Channing Tatum or anything like that. Whenever an attractive actor comes on the scene, it's very easy for people to be like, oh, well, yeah, he just got the job because of that. But he's really funny. Like he is. And I have to believe that the directors found that in him and brought it out of him. Whereas if they'd, played it safer, it would have been a much more, it would have been cute, but it wouldn't have been funny.
Yeah, as far as the Channing Tatum thing is concerned, that's something that I've been talking about a lot recently over on Soderbergh 2828, because, in the last few movies that he made, Soderbergh tended to cast Tatum in everything. And it was one of those things where, just like with you, I kind of had dismissed him, probably unfairly. First time I saw him was in some Nicholas Sparks movie, and I was just like, oh, this is so terrible. And then, it's like, well, Soderbergh's casting him. Well, there's got to be a reason for that. And then you watch him in stuff like, Magic Mike in particular, and he's fantastic, So, I'm definitely a fan of Tatum now, too, and he is really, really good in this. He's kind of more of the straight man compared to Jonah Hill, right?
Yes.
And but their chemistry together, I think, is really, really solid. And the 21 Jump Street is a movie which I think is really, really good. Although, part of me, I think maybe part of the reason why I love it so much is just because I know what's coming next, and I almost feel like you gotta, not that 21 Jump Street is bad, but 21 Jump Street is definitely Star Wars to 22 Jump Street's Empire. You know what I mean?
Okay. You have talked up 22 Jump Street. To tip the hand here, we will be looking at it for next week, and I'm really looking forward to it, because if you're saying it's next level compared to this, I'm completely on board with that at this point. And I just really, like, when I was watching 21 Jump Street, what's interesting about it to me is that the dynamic between Channing Tatum and Jonah Hill was a dynamic that I want to see between Han and Lando if they're going to be younger and in a movie together. Something that is very loose, something that is very zany at times, and at least one of them being, and maybe they switch roles, like Hill and Tatum switch depending on the circumstances at several points in the movie as to who's the person taking it seriously and who's the person joking around. And I think that speaks to a dynamic that I'd want to see, and I think it would give the characters somewhere to grow from the Han Solo movie to when we see them meet up again in Empire. So, but I mean, all of that, I mean, it's an academic question, of course, because we're obviously never going to see it. But I mean, we'll see vestiges of it, but it's so weird. How are they going to craft it now? And I just, I don't know. Well, I mean, we'll find out, but I think that, so with the paper, we're saying, it's worth seeing for sort of historical curio sort of thing. Like, oh, this is Ron Howard back before, this is shortly before his Oscar days. This is right before he hit that Oscar stride.
Yeah, this was, the year before Apollo 13, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. He's one of these very, very diverse filmmakers, in terms of his style and everything. I mean, I guess, these 3 movies in a row would be like The Paper, Apollo 13, and then Ransom, right? I think those are the 3 in a row.
Yep.
I mean, and in 3 consecutive years. Like, that's pretty flexible in terms of, what he can do and everything like that. You add things like Willow and, How the Grinch Stole Christmas and Ed TV to the mix, and it's like, wow, not to mention the Da Vinci Code and all that stuff, and then A Beautiful Mind and everything. Like, he really is all over the place, which I think is kind of cool, His style is almost that he doesn't have a style, he adapts to whatever the material needs. And I think that speaks towards his ability to do a Star Wars movie. I mean, when his name was first mentioned, it's like, oh yeah, duh. Of course they're going to get him to come in because they know exactly what he's going to deliver, which is something, and in terms of his reliability, he's, a friend of the family for all practical purposes. And he isn't locked in to a very specific style like maybe Miller and Lord are. And he can adapt to whatever the challenge in front of him is,
So the one question I have, and I'd say that this is a good question to go out on because this seems to be sort of our wheelhouse to look for. But visually, do you see anything that is going to require substantial reworking and reshoots between the way these 2 movies are shot?
I mean, I think that in some ways, Howard is going to adapt his style to fit whatever Miller and Lord had established. Okay. And I think Miller and Lord had already sort of, altered their style a little bit in order to go in that direction. I mean, the fact that they hired Bradford Young, the guy who shot Arrival and Selma, as their photographer, and, their editors were... They had the editor of Shaun of the Dead and the editor of, basically every Ridley Scott movie, but, JFK and Black Hawk Down and stuff like that.
And all of those people are still in place, so far as we know, right?
Yeah, definitely the cinematographer is, because Ron Howard tweeted a picture of him on the set. Okay. So visually, and I think that, maybe it's going to be almost kind of like a TV show type of thing, where... the directors change from week to week, but the crew is in place in order to provide that continuity, Okay. Which I think was smart on, Howard's part. I mean, for one thing, you don't fire Bradford Young because the guy is amazing, but also, even if, he would have normally gone to, someone who he had worked with, numerous times in the past or whatever. I mean, there's so much upheaval to begin with. it seems like you want to keep everything else in place as much as you possibly can in order to provide some sort of stability, not only on the set, but also in terms of the style and everything like that. You know?
Yeah, no, I definitely, I think that's fair. I mean, I just, when I watched The Paper, I definitely saw a difference in the framing and the way the camera moved. But to your point, if you're keeping the same cinematographer, that's going to affect how things move. But speaking of people he's worked before, Clint Howard is now going to be in the Han Solo movie, as everybody I think expected. And I think as both a Star Wars and Star Trek fan, he needs to be somebody offering Tranya. I desperately want that to happen because that would cause the fan base meltdown of all time. It would be the greatest, I think.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he's going to be some sort of weird alien thing or not. I don't know. Yeah, there's a couple. Well, I guess we already knew that Warwick Davis is going to be in it. Which is kind of cool. But yeah, like in terms of like all this, I mean, because there's all these people who are always work together and everything. I mean, it should be noted, I guess, that The Paper was written by David Kapp, who just the year before had written Jurassic Park. So that's interesting. And I guess we might as well also just mention that 21 Jump Street's written by Michael Bacall, who wrote Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And he's also
still haven't seen that.
Oh no! Oh yeah,
No.
Check it out. It's good. I'd seen it a couple times in the past, but I just recently saw it as part of a Edgar Wright retrospective, and whatever it was this time around, it really struck a chord with me. But it's definitely a pretty cool movie, and he's an actor too. He's in a lot of Tarantino stuff, like Inglourious Bastards and Death
Oh
Proof
yeah,
and
okay.
everything.
I know. Yes, I know who you're talking about now. Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah, it's kind of cool, and it's interesting too that both of these movies. Well, I guess Ron Howard doesn't write anything himself, but Lord and Miller are writers, but they didn't write 21 Jump Street, and they weren't going to write the Han Solo movie either, which is strange to me. But then thinking about it and thinking about how they didn't write 21 Jump Street either, maybe it's not that strange. I don't know. It's weird. But
yeah, I mean, coming out of these, we always do these side by sides to see, is there a marked difference, like doing the comparison and everything. But I think that coming out of this, there's definitely a sense of, to your point, stability. So I'm looking forward to next week when we are going to be looking at 22 Jump Street versus Apollo 13, and maybe there's going to be a bit more of a stark contrast between the two. I'm actually really looking forward to that. But something we also look forward to here on the Nerd Party Network is interaction with people who are listening. So you can go ahead to nerdparty.com/contact, look up Great Shot Kid and drop us a line. We'll get the message. You can also go find the Nerd Party over on Twitter at Join Nerd Party. And you can go to Facebook at facebook.com/the Nerd Party. And we are home to a great number of shows: SETI Alpha 3, Punch It, Aggressive Negotiations, Nerd Nuptial, Filibuster. We've got more shows than we know what to do with, and they're all for your listening pleasure, up to and including Owlpost from the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. So that's where you can contact the network and the show. Mike, where can people find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, and you can also find me on TalkFilmSociety.com doing a show called Soderbergh 2828, where we look at Channing Tatum movies. And you can also find me on CommentaryTrackStars.com doing Commentary Trackstars, and on Trek.fm doing The Edge and Stage 9 with you.
Yes, Stage 9 with me, where we look at the work and inspirations of Star Trek creators. It's a lot of fun, especially with Discovery coming out. And you can find me also co-hosting right here on the Nerd Party Network, Aggressive Negotiations with Matt Rushing. You can find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. And if you want to interact with me personally online, just look for Kessel Junkie, because that's my name out there. So with that, again, your assignment for next week is to watch 22 Jump Street and Apollo 13.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.